You, Bianca Del Rio.
Welcome to Queer as Pop, the podcast where we discuss all things queer, from pop culture to top headlines. I'm Matty, and we're finally back with Season 2. And today I'm joined by my lovely guest host, the one and only legendary drag queen and certified world savior, Miss Coco Peru.
Legendary. Hello.
Hello, my dear.
That's a nice way of saying ancient.
I'm gonna regret that one.
Yes.
And joining us for today as our main guest is Mr. Hamish Steele, creator of the upcoming animated Netflix show DeadEndia. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, I'm going to be very important in the future.
You're important to me already. You gave me a job.
I did. It does star the wonderful Miss Coco Peru.
Before we continue, I'd like to ask both of you, how has 2021 treated you so far?
I'll go first. It's been the roller coaster continues. I mean, it's ups and downs, and I'm a little nauseated, actually, and ready to get off this fucking ride. Oh, are we allowed to curse? I forget.
Miss Coco, you can say whatever the fuck you want.
Okay. So, yeah, I just I feel like I was telling you earlier, this vaccine is like a dangling carrot in front of me, and I want it, and I'm getting all the sort of like, we'll get through this, and all the patience and all the, the sort of mindfulness that I've tried to have, working through this pandemic. I'm over it now.
Where do legends rank on the the order of vaccine? Are they above or below doctors and teachers?
Yeah, let's just put it this way. I was thinking of calling my next show Miss Coco Peru is dispensable. That is one of the sort of sad things that I've realized is that in a global pandemic, drag, it's not really up there, and you feel a little dispensable. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I thank God for my fans. Yeah, and for this sounds corny, but and for moments when I get to go in and be a part of DeadEndia. That's been a real treat. It's one thing to be hired for a show, and that's wonderful. But to have it happen and give you a little bit of extra focus during a time like this, it means even more.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were actually casting during March last year. I can't remember the complete order. I remember one of our castmates is Alex Brightman, the Broadway actor, and I remember his casting very specifically because we had an audition. And that day, Broadway closed, and he was told, the news got out when he was in the audition. And then, as we were casting the rest of the cast, it started to be casting people from their kitchens. And it was obviously back then in March, we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know how long this would last. But I definitely remember feeling like at least giving some actors something they could record from home or from a studio or wherever was some little bit of joy, I suppose, last summer when everything else was falling apart.
Yes, it was very joyful. I'm glad to hear that you feel that way, because that is exactly how I felt. I felt grateful to have the job, but just that much more grateful because of what was happening. So I'm glad to hear you say that, because you did provide that.
It's pretty amazing that you guys were able to pull off the production of the show considering the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, I know we're going to talk about DeadEndia later, but Coco 100% earned the role. We auditioned a bunch of people. We had some big names and some sort of voice acting kind of legends, but it was just a kind of unanimous decision, really. We were just all laughing, and we knew that there was so much heart behind it as well. Again, I'm trying not to say too much about the character, but you definitely needed everything that Coco was bringing. So we were all panicking, thinking that the show was going to be, swept up and cancelled because the whole world was falling apart. And but this, the casting of everyone, but including Coco, was just such a nice thing. It was when we started really there's so many moments making a TV show where you think, oh my god, it's going to be real, and one of those moments is the casting. And I'm happy we got to work together, and I'm happy that we can chat now as friends and colleagues, and it's wonderful.
Well, whenever I go into record, I think Hamish knows this, is that I always end by asking, "Are you happy, Hamish?" Because I know I always worry, I hope the director's not offended that I'm, but I just feel like it's so your baby. Mm-hmm. And as a creator myself, I just connect with you on that level of just complete respect that I want you to be happy. It's like you're my number one person I want to make happy. So,
well, the thing about babies is you get to, give them all the care and love in the world, but you also have to accept that they're their own thing and that they grow beyond you. And so, DeadEndia was absolutely my baby when I was making it as a webcomic on my own, but the collaboration and bringing other people in has been definitely one of the highlights, and seeing it become something else, become something unique. Sorry, I know we're going to talk about this later.
No, it's fine. I'm really excited for the series, and I'm sure it's going to be amazing. We're going to move over to the next segment of the show and discuss this week's hot topics. These are all headlines from around the world focused on queer-related issues that we discuss and share our opinions about. So, one of the things that's been discussed lately is that the United Nations is looking to outlaw use of religious beliefs to justify violating rights for the LGBTQ plus community. What are your thoughts about this, Miss Coco?
Oh, well, I'm all for it. I mean, I feel like I was a victim of religion growing up. And I have since resolved that, and I've even allowed a little bit of religion back into my life. But I don't ever think religion should be something that's used to put anybody down. It goes against, I think, exactly what it's supposed to do. So I think it's important to protect people. And I think even in these religious institutions, I feel like I was victimized growing up. And I wish there had been something in place that protected me from that. I don't see it'll be interesting to see how that gets, if it's passed, how it gets put to use. But I'm sure that they're looking into where countries where people are executed and things like that. Which I actually had a friend in New York, and I've talked about him in one of my Casa Cocos, who was arrested for being homosexual and was on death row. Was going to be stoned or thrown off a building or something, and was able to convince a guard to let him out in the middle of the night, and the guard was paid off by the family, and he escaped through this. It was like, he told me it was like listening to a movie, and I thought, my God, I can't believe this sweet young guy was actually about to be put to death for being gay in a country where that was his religion saw that as illegal.
Mr. Steele, have you had any similar experiences in your life?
Well, I'm not to that degree, obviously. I think it's one of those things where it's quite sad that you find out this wasn't, a policy to begin with. And I think, as Coco was saying, it's so often children of the victim, and these kinds of like religion really victimizes children who have no choice in the matter of like being, LGBT, and also being in a religious household. It feels very much like born into a prison or born into a situation where there's just no escape. I mean, I just feel like the point of life, the point of the human race, the point of, what we're supposed to be doing on planet Earth is trying to understand each other better and trying to create a way for us to all live together better. So I think when it comes to religion, there is this sometimes difficult quandary for some people where you obviously need to respect religious beliefs, but not at the cost of people's lives or well-being. And I think that's just what part of understanding each other is. Like, some of that is compromise. I'm hoping that, like Coco was saying again, like I'm hoping that somehow this is passed, and I don't know what them I've forgotten the word, what it looks like for them to actually what is the word I'm looking for?
Enforce it, or
yeah, that's what's it. Yeah, enforce. Like, I don't know what that looks like. And like I said, it's sad that this wasn't the case to begin with. I mean, I know we all were hearing about the stories of camps and all kinds of things recently, and I have no idea how that was resolved, if the UN was stepping in at all. I mean, I'm pro this. I will admit this is the one topic that may be a little bit above my pay grade. But I was suppose lucky. I didn't grow up in a very particularly religious family. I have many friends who have, and it's traumatizing. It, that kind of conditional love rather than unconditional is truly traumatizing to so many people.
This leads us into the next question, and it's something I personally struggle with a lot. How are we supposed to deal with problematic pop culture where the creators in one way or another diminish or use their platform to incite hate or assault the community? At the top of my head, J.K. Rowling is probably the best example of this. So, Mr. Steele, someone who consumes and creates pop culture, what is your opinion?
I mean, if I do anything truly horrible, if I use my platform to spread hate and influence regressive policies, drop DeadEndia like a hat. I don't care. Like, there's more important like, pop culture is obviously very important to all of us and to to us three, but there are more important things, and I think letting go of something that maybe was very important to you as a child is very tough. I know from my experience, like, all the music that meant anything to me growing up turns out to have been created by a lot of quite horrible people. It's tough. It does, but I think, I like I said, I just think there's more important things in pop culture, and I think you are able to consume things. I think you have to be responsible with how much money you are giving to certain creators, if that matters to you. But I don't know. I feel like I'm interested in what you guys think, because There's like that slither, I guess, of being a creator myself, where I can put my like self in J.K. Rowling's shoes for a second and and think. But I it's just very disappointing that that's how you choose to use your platform. That's I think this the J.K. Rowling thing in particular, I think is tied up a little bit with the very specific transphobia problem in the UK, which it's a slightly different brand. It's very it's tied up with kind of more liberal, more feminist kind of circles that I guess it would be associated with elsewhere. Our media just absolutely despises trans people at every level.
I'm shocked by that.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. I better people have talked about this, but there's this obsession with. Interestingly, it's exclusively trans women. If trans men or non-binary people are mentioned, it's in a kind of awkward disclaimer. But there's this kind of hatred of trans women and fear of them taking over big quotation marks, quote unquote, women's spaces. And it's fear mongering. It's just the exact kind of like scare tactics you would see about gay people. It's just rebranded, and so many well-meaning people who speak of injustice and seem passionate about it have been kind of misled into believing this is the fight that women. And whenever I say women, it's in big quotation marks because they will say women and people who aren't women. They're making all these distinctions. It's very interesting watching a particular brand of feminists reduce women to body parts after years of trying to do the opposite. It's just so sad. And like I said, it's a bunch of people who I think in another life could have been on the other side, but they read one article or one sort of story, and you see it happen. It's kind of brain rot. You see their whole Twitter feed turn into transphobia, or their whole life turn into transphobia. So that was a bit of a tangent about J.K. Rowling, but I don't know. I guess I feel somewhat lucky in that Harry Potter was never actually that dear to me. I watched the films, and later in life I read the books on audio tape or something. It's just like a thing I read. But I guess to some people who maybe tied a lot of their identity to it, it's like a harder thing to abandon.
Yeah, because this whole deal with the TERFs or trans-exclusive radical feminists, it's somehow very unique in the way it's organized in the UK and have, with a lack for a better word, penetrated the feminist movement. Is that your perception as well?
Yes. There's I mean, I say unique. I actually don't know what it's like in America or elsewhere. My understanding is that in very broad strokes, transphobia would usually be associated more with a kind of conservative mindset. But over here, I think that's also true, but there's this very, very vocal subset kind of in the left side of things. It's weird. It's one of those things where you have to you're constantly having to like reread things or pay attention to signals or signs that people are dropping about how they view this issue. It's very demoralizing, I think, to. Someone did a report. I'm completely speaking, pulling facts and things from the air, but someone did a report about how much the main newspapers over here had talked about trans women, and there was pretty much an article every day in most papers about trans women, not written by trans people, ranging from the most like banal, oh, they are, they are complaining again, to we need to get rid of them. It's and like the BBC itself like is constantly making programs about the quote unquote trans debate and what to do with it. It's just, it feels like a relentless daily assault. And I don't know. I think I'm not the person to really answer what to do about it, but J.K. Rowling's whole thing is very much tied into that. So there's some context, I suppose, to where this whole thing came from. I realize I've talked for a long time.
No, I actually find that really interesting, and I didn't realize how in the press this issue is. I mean, I know about J.K. Rowling, but I didn't realize that it was so much in the press there. I think, of course, for me, the most important thing when this issue of trans comes up is just to listen to my trans friends and their experiences, and that is really tells you a lot of what you need to know. But also, I think with this social media and everybody having a voice, years ago, people would have these thoughts, but rarely did they get publicized. Now, with everybody having a voice, everyone has an opinion and everyone's expressing their opinion. So all of a sudden, we're bombarded with so much of it. And so I think there's good and bad to both sides of that. But I will say what I think is good about it is, the homophobes are outing themselves. The transphobes are outing themselves. So you have a better picture of who's on your side and who's not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm forever grateful for any of my favorite authors who don't have a Twitter. But I agree. I think there's good and bad. There's I don't think so. There's this Harry Potter video game coming out, and a lot of people want to get it. A lot of people are conflicted. I don't want to buy it. I don't really think people should, but I also don't think the people who end up buying it should receive, I guess, the full force of my outrage. The in terms of problematic pop culture, shall we say, I still think the viewers aren't necessarily to blame, I guess, for the don't even know what I'm trying to say, really. I just think there's a lot of pop culture where a creator is bad, but it's still a lot of people's work went into that. There's a lot of stuff in the news at the moment about Joss Whedon, and I know a lot of people feel very conflicted about their love of Buffy. And I think if you don't want to watch Buffy anymore, cool. If you can accept that Buffy is the product of a lot of people's hard work, not just one person, I think that's the way you can enjoy it. And you can also just enjoy, I think just because something affected you or impacted you or influenced you, you're not bad by association of that. And I think people forget often that bad people can make good things. I don't think something that always drives me a little bit crazy is if someone gets revealed to be a bad person, people say, well, I hated their stuff anyway, or oh, why did no one see it? Because all their stuff was terrible all along. And I don't think that's very helpful, because it kind of associates, it makes people think that you can spot bad people through not liking their song or not liking their TV show or something.
Right. I also think we have we're living in a world too now where we've made heroes of people, and we forget that they're human beings are complex, and so the disappointment, it feels more intense because we've lifted these people up to such a status, when in reality they're just people who have a gift to create and happen to create something that we loved. But I think we're living in a world now where we make heroes out of people. I see it even with drag queens. They can make you and there is this tendency too to want to build people up just so you can tear them down. But I do think in the case of, I agree with Hamish. It's like with if you want to boycott something, then you should, and if you don't, you don't. I don't know. I think at the end of the day, it's who do you want to be in this world, and sometimes I get angry with people who will say attack me, like I should be doing this, or Coco, you should be doing that, and it's like, listen, I do a lot. What are you doing in the world, to make change? So we're each responsible. Really, each of us are responsible for creating the world that we want to live in. And so if something doesn't jive with you, then you have to do something about it, whether it's boycotting or educating people or going to a march. It's complicated.
Yeah, everyone is people. I know it's not. Everyone is people, but I don't know. There's certain people who you can maybe hope to argue with or debate with and change their minds, and there's some people who feel like it's not worth your time to try and change the minds of. But yeah, everyone is complicated. You don't always know the full story.
This kind of borderlines into cancel culture and how we should perceive that as well. Should we punish someone for what they did 5 years ago and label them irredeemable for life, or forgive them and acknowledge growth? Where do you draw the line?
I think one of the problems with cancel culture is labeling it cancel culture and making it seem like everybody is treated in the same way for the same crimes. I think what you're saying is interesting because it's it depends, I think sometimes if people do apologize, I as a person am happy with that. Sometimes I'm not. I don't know. I think it's just case by case.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and opinions. We're going to take a little break and then move over to our interview segment featuring Mr. Hamish Steele, so stick around. Welcome back. We are going to proceed with our guest for today, Mr. Hamish Steele, the creator of DeadEndia, an animated Netflix show debuting later this year. I wanted to start off with asking you, how did your interest for comics and animation start, and what inspired you to create DeadEndia?
Wow. This is going to sound a little pretentious, but I think I've always been a storyteller. I've always been drawing, I remember drawing maps for islands for my movie franchise when I was 3 or 4. I have always wanted to tell stories. I remember having like a haircut as a little kid, and I just talked the hairdresser. I just explained everything about my trilogy of movies I'm going to direct. And it's just been something, I've always wanted to do. And I think when I got a little bit older, I realized that movies, you need a very large budget and a whole crew of people. For books, you need to get a publisher kind of interested. And I kind of whittled it down to thinking comics are something that I can do right now. all I needed a pen and a piece of paper, and I would draw little comics and show them to friends at school. And that was the quickest way I could get the stories in my head visually in front of someone else. And all my stories back then were super derivative and like complete rip-offs. I remember pitching, well, not pitching, but like trying to convince someone that I had invented the idea of an island with a theme park filled with dinosaurs. As like, I called it Dino Park, and I was trying so hard to like convince everyone it was my original idea. But that, I don't know, it did help just to kind of, I think something it takes a long time for some kids to realize is something like Jurassic Park is a story that someone wrote and created rather than just a thing that exists. And I was always very fascinated in the process behind stuff, loved behind the scenes things. So I guess I knew I wanted to be a creator very early on. It took me a while to work out exactly what way. I kind of dabbled in like a lot of things. I tried stand-up, I tried video game development. I used to do kind of comedy, YouTube sort of character comedy. But comics were something that I could always do. Like no matter where I was, I always had a comic on the go. I tried multiple web comics of varying quality. DeadEndia became a web comic eventually, but it was probably my 5th or 6th serious attempt to do a web comic. I've purged the internet of most of them, my previous ones. But yeah, it was just something I always did, and I think animation felt like an extension of that. By that point, by the time I went to university to study animation, I had kind of developed a way I liked drawing, and it was very cartoony. So, I briefly considered other art courses, but that was just the way that my life turned out.
Yeah, how did the process look like when you were pitching this for executives at Netflix? What were the thoughts and discussions behind the fact that this is an animated show featuring a trans character?
So, it's a weird, long story. So the two main characters of DeadEndia are Barney and Norma, and I had been drawing them in little web comics and little short things for a few years. This was around 2013, 14. I saw on the internet a call for submissions for a YouTube channel called Cartoon Hangover, which is run by Frederator Studios that do Adventure Time and a few other things like that. I sent them my Barney Norma comics, and they said they liked them, but I needed to actually submit an animation pitch. So I developed them into something called Dead End, and sent them a storyboard of that. They loved it. We made a 5-minute YouTube short, which you can still watch, called Dead End. And we pitched that around to various channels. Again, this was in sort of 2014, 15. Nickelodeon got interested, but eventually passed on it. And by that point, I developed all the characters to a point where I just wanted to tell the story. So I started making a webcomic based on it. At the same time, my connection at Nickelodeon took me on to develop more shorts. And so I started having these kind of parallel careers where I was doing the DeadEndia webcomic while pitching animation as a kind of day job. And I developed loads of animated shows that took a really long time to, I developed about 4 or 5 different shows all the way up to the pilot stage, and then they fell through for various reasons. And I've kind of embellished this the more I talk about it as like some dramatic moment. But basically, I got to a point where I was like, by around 2018, 19, the webcomics had been successful. I got them published with a publisher called Nobrow, which is now the book version that is what is technically being adapted. Comics were going great for me. I was winning awards. I was doing tours and comic cons and things like that. And animation was fun, but it was just a series of rejections and failed pilots. So I was getting to this point where I thought that maybe I should just be focusing on comics as a full-time job. But my sort of animation producer said, we'll just have one last meeting with Netflix. And I pitched them a bunch of shows, most of them terrible. And then one of them said, did anything come from that old Dead End short you did on YouTube all those years ago? And I said, well, it's now an award-winning graphic novel, and I like slid it across the table. And and honestly, that was the quickest anything has ever happened. We got development money within the week, and then we got the green light a few months later to make the show. And I do think having a graphic novel, having a comic, was such an easy way to get through the door, because all the other projects I'd worked on, so much time was just spent trying to explain and try and get executives to imagine what was in your head. Whereas a comic, I could just say, this is what it is. When it comes to the trans and just in general, the kind of LGBT aspect of the story, in the original Dead End YouTube short, there is a passing reference to Barney being gay. But the way that was able to happen, I think, was because the channel itself was a YouTube channel and they had a slightly older audience. And it could be passed off as a joke, even though I knew it wasn't. This has definitely been one of the most interesting 5 years in the animation world, in terms of representation at least. Because we went from when I was originally pitching things in 2014 to you will never ever see any LGBT character in a children's show. What are you talking about? To a point now where I feel like channels are realizing, and this is my more cynical take, channels are realizing that we're profitable and people are looking for this. So they're trying to pick up any kind of project with queer characters they can find. That I don't feel that way at Netflix. One thing I was really prepared for when they greenlit the show was to have a fight for this representation. I'm not just saying this. I'm not just, saying nice things about my bosses. I really do believe this. I have never once had a fight with them about any of the representation. If anything, at the start of production, I was far more nervous about mentioning any of it because I had been quite burned before. I had been in pitching rooms where they had basically suggested that they want the show, but me being represented in the show they want would be inappropriate. And basically, one of them is essentially suggested that I would have to closet myself if I wanted to make a show for children. And I mean, obviously that's progress. In some ways, that's progress, because the generation before me, we wouldn't even be in that room. But I think also the fact that the graphic novel was out, I never had to ask. They could see the comic, they could see the fan base, they could see the content in there. They knew that if they were greenlighting the show, this is what they were buying. And by that point in the comics, they'd been developed. Barney in the books is canonically trans. There's more representation than that. It's not just it's not just his burden. But yeah, like I said, they've never asked me to change anything. If anything, they picked up on my nervousness and have asked me to make it more overt, more clear in the show. And one of the things I really have enjoyed is that, like I said, I didn't want Barney to just be the one queer character we were allowed to have. The whole show has a sort of queer theming, I suppose, not just in representation, but I think in some of the ongoing stories. And every opportunity I've tried to cast LGBT actors in all kinds of roles, heroes, villains, humans, monsters, all kinds of things, just so that the whole show and world feels like it's kind of ours and it's a show about our community, even if it's I basically didn't want Barney to be the gay best friend in a very straight show. I think DeadEndia is kind of an LGBT storyline, I suppose.
It's interesting discussing queer representation in animated shows and shows for kids. You had series like Adventure Time and Legend of Korra kind of starting to touch on the subject, so it's great to hear that there's been such progress that Netflix didn't even have any issues with it.
Absolutely. I mean, I was pitching things for quite a while, and I was pitching DeadEndia to an extent for quite a while in different channels. And I think to tell the story, I'm so glad in a way that Nickelodeon said no all those years ago. I'm so glad that the other shows I was working on didn't go to pilot, because I think that, every battle that people like Rebecca Sugar or Noelle Stevenson were fighting wasn't just a battle for their show. It was a battle for everyone's shows and everyone's content. And I think DeadEndia is allowed to happen because things like Steven Universe and She-Ra and other shows have paved the way. So I'm very, very grateful to them. I met Noelle Stevenson at a convention. I was on a panel with her. I tried to say this, but I don't think it came across. But I would say this again if I ever got to meet them. And I'm truly hoping that I don't want Barney to be the one trans character on cartoons, and I don't want anyone to think that, well, DeadEndia did it, so we don't have to. I'm hoping, just as those shows before me did, I'm hoping that DeadEndia will continue to pave that way, and more shows can, come through that go even further. Like, my hope is that in 10 years DeadEndia feels kind of dated, because that would be good. That will show progress. I don't want it to feel like it's this outlier, this blip, if you know what I mean.
Is there anything about the premise of the show that you can tell our listeners so that they have somewhat of a grasp on what it's about?
Well, it's about a beautiful and talented superstar called Pauline Phoenix, with a gorgeous voice, played by Miss Coco Peru. It's actually interesting. When we were talking about the problematic pop culture topic, I realized how much some of the show deals with that. A part of the storyline of the show is about what happens if the celebrity that you've based your whole life around doesn't turn out to be the person you want them to be. So that's like a really strong theme. I guess the elevator pitch I give is that it's a comedy, horror, teen drama, adventure show set in a haunted theme park. Barney, Norma, there's a talking dog called Pugsley who is possessed by a demon, and there's Courtney, who's a banished demon. They all live in this haunted theme park, which is owned by Pauline, Coco's character, and it's a bit like Buffy. It's a bit like all those kinds of shows I was talking about, where it's monsters and emotions and while there's obviously demons and ghosts and all kinds of danger, I think what people will come back for is the human drama, and we spent a lot of time making sure that all of that was like as important to the show as all the monsters. It's just I'm so proud of it. Like I know I know I might be a bit biased, but I just think it's a really good show, and I'm really like
Yeah.
I'm so happy that it is. We were super struck by COVID. We all had to work from home. I haven't met half my crew. I haven't met any of our cast. But I'm so glad that I can be proud of what we have made. I'm very excited to do podcasts next year when I can actually talk about it in detail. Because I don't want to spoil too much. But yeah.
Well, then I would like to ask you, Miss Coco, how was this experience for you playing this character?
Oh, well, I just want to say I loved listening to you speak, Hamish, about your childhood, about being a storyteller. I almost felt like I was watching a little movie about your life. It was wonderful. And I agree, we've all built upon the history of which we've come from. And I find it so satisfying that a show like DeadEndia is allowed to exist. Because when I created Coco, that was part of my mission, is like, well, if I want queer characters to exist in popular culture, I have to be that. And that's what inspired me to create Coco, was that I was, again, responsible for creating that kind of world I wanted to live in and that I wanted younger people to inherit. And so the fact that DeadEndia exists is it's wonderful, but it's even more satisfying for me being an openly gay performer for the last 30 years. And then to be included in it is just so exciting. And I went into this audition not knowing what the character was totally like. And but I just, in my mind, decided, this is mine. And so I left and I didn't hear anything. And I even called my manager and I said, oh, I am a little sad about this one. I said, because I felt like it was mine. And then when I got it, it just felt like a gift that I received. And I go in every time that I've been invited in to do recordings, I go in completely nervous, so worried about doing exactly what they want. I'm so full of anxiety, but excitement as well. And then I keep thinking, why did they hire me like that?
You never have to be nervous. I mean, I know that certain members of our crew make a special effort to make sure they're available for your records, because it's always a wonderful highlight. Because of the time difference, we're based in London. All the actors record in the morning for them, but it's usually at the end of the day for us. And some days work has been so tough and so exhausting, and I think, and I've still got to record. I've still got to work for a few more hours. Instantly into a Coco record, I'm so grateful. It's exactly the medicine I need at the end of a tough day. You always just make us laugh, and like I said, it's also just that heart. And I think one of the reasons we were so we're really careful with our casting, because even though we record separately, there's COVID, we're probably not going to meet for a long time. I wanted it to feel, you kind of need to make sure everyone fits, if you know what I mean. You kind of put them all alongside each other, and is this the show we want to build? Is this what does this cast, I suppose, answer our mission statement of making this this queer show, this open show, this funny show? I mean, I think that's the other thing. I think sometimes when people talk about queer characters and trans characters, they're worried that the whole show is going to be kind of misery and suffering and anxiety and pain, and they just can't imagine that actually queer characters can have fun and be funny and be stupid. And I think another thing is, more people are becoming aware of the idea of queer coded villains, and I think that's a problem because there's no queer coded heroes. And I think we when you have queer characters who are heroes, villains, sidekicks, background characters, the whole world's inhabited by us, you get to have a lot more fun. And characters like Barney don't have to shoulder the burden of like educating the audience about trans issues, because we do, we have moments of the show where things get real, but to me, Barney's defining traits are his like impulsiveness, his like big heart. He's in kind of some strange ironic ways, he's kind of the straight man of the show. Like he's sort of the everyman. He's the audience identification, the audience surrogate character. He just happens to be a gay trans man. And I think the things he's struggling with are things that everyone should be able to relate to, no matter who they are. He has, a few problems with his parents. He's he compartmentalizes things, and he, like I said, he's a bit too impulsive. And I think those are things people can relate to, no matter who they are. So I don't know. I'm just really happy. Like I said, we auditioned so many people for all of these roles, and there's just times when you're in an audition and like, it's funny you saying, I think I had that, because when me and the other crew members, the other producers and stuff are in auditions, usually the actor walks out, and most of the times when we know who we've cast, we've all just like looked at each other and silently kind of said, yeah, that's who we're casting, isn't it, to each other. And that definitely happened with you.
I love hearing that.
I mean, I know that I came on the show and all I've done is just praise you, but it's what you deserve.
Oh my gosh. Well, I appreciate that. And I can relate to why. The other reason I love what you just said is because when I did a movie in 1999 called Trick. And one of the things that I loved about that movie when I first read it, and my character was not in it when in the first script, but what I loved about the script was that it wasn't about suffering. It wasn't about, having to come out. It was just two gay guys looking for a place to have sex. And to me, that spoke of like how far we had come, that we could just have a simple movie where people are just being themselves. I mean, in a way, I feel like DeadEndia, reading the book and everything, it felt that way to me as well. It was like these people just exist in the world. There's no explanation. There's the struggles are everyone's struggles, and that really came through in the book. And I think that's why something like this can be successful, because it is relatable, and it is storytelling, and people, regardless of their differences, respond to a good story. And you've told a great story.
Thank you. Well, I think representation is both very important for the people it's representing, but it's equally important for people who aren't being represented by that character, but can see a character, relate to them, understand people like that a lot more. And especially with kids, people might get sick of it, but it would be sweet if kids knew about Barney. So if someone in their life came out as trans, they're like, oh, like Barney. And we've given them a character who they possibly, they might love that character. I find the idea of kids, trans or cis, cosplaying or drawing Barney or whatever, loving that character, equally sweet and important, if you know what I mean.
I totally know what you mean, and I love that idea myself, because I have gay trans friends that I love. And the thought of them being celebrated and then I totally get what you're saying.
I have a dear friend who has an 11-year-old daughter who is trans, and I think a show like this will have a positive effect on her life, seeing that representation like this still exists. So, Mr. Hamish Steele, thank you so much for putting your work out there, and I really hope that DeadEndia will stand as an example for animated shows with LGBTQ+ representation. So, I'd like to ask you before we leave, would you like to share on where our listeners can find more information about you?
If you want to find me, you don't have to. I am Hamish Steele on everything. That's just who I am. The DeadEndia books, I think should be available. There's 2 of them. Anywhere, use your local comic book stores or your bookstores. They need your support right now. And I think that's everything. I don't want to be found too much.
Alright, we'll just cut you out.
No. Leave it in.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No worries. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Coco Peru, and I am a vaccine envier. Yes, I envy people who have gotten the vaccine. It's not an easy thing to admit, but it is my truth at the moment. I recently had to take a break from social media because I found myself thinking, if I have to see one more photo of a happy person getting the vaccine, my head is going to explode. Even worse is the well-meaning reminder, #GetTheVaccine. I can't help but think, what are you fucking kidding me or what? Fuck you. Of course, there are so many reasons I want the vaccine, but one of the major motivations is because I haven't seen my 94-year-old mother for a year. Before COVID, I would visit my mother every 3 months, if not more. However, she made me promise not to travel to her until we were both vaccinated. Thankfully, I was able to book her a vaccine, and now it's just a waiting game until I get mine. But when your mom is 94, as my favorite song says, one hasn't got time for the waiting game. In the meantime, my mom and I give thanks for modern technology that allows us to see each other every day on our mobile devices. Still, as much as I have counted my blessings this past year, I'm envious of some of my friends who have friends administering the vaccine who've called them in for leftovers. I think, well, good for them. But why don't I have friends like that? I have an old friend from high school who was able to get the vaccine because they are technically obese. I mean, if you looked at them, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't consider them obese. Maybe a little overweight, but who hasn't put on the COVID-20? I'm sure this person used their privilege to get the vaccine, and for that reason, I'm no longer friends with their fat ass. Another friend got the vaccine by fibbing, telling a little white lie, and encouraged me to do the same by signing up for the vaccine as an educator. When I said I couldn't lie like that, they asked, "Isn't your 94-year-old mother worth a little white lie?" Talking about educators, my husband, Raphael, a professor at a local college, finally got the vaccine. His appointment was in the late afternoon, so I went with him, holding out hope that they'd have a leftover vaccine to offer me. After isolating for a year, I wanted to be able to share with him this historic moment, together. When it was Raphael's turn and we pulled our car up, we learned that there was no extra vaccine. I was crushed, yet happy to see my husband get his vaccine. Yet crushed, but of course relieved for my husband. Yet crushed. In the line of cars next to us, there was a young gay couple that I could see had both gotten the vaccine, and they took photos and video that would no doubt be broadcast on social media for their friends to see. Looking over at them, I thought, oh, they look so happy. And then the next moment I thought, I'd like to smack the vaccines right out of them. Upon arriving home, I decided then to Google vaccine envy, to see if I was alone in my twisted feelings. Turns out I'm not, and vaccine envy is real. In one article I read, quote, "Jealousy is often viewed as a negative emotion, something that reflects a lack of generosity, but that's not so. Instead of saying you are jealous that a friend was vaccinated, understand that primarily you might be feeling this way because you are feeling fearful." End quote. And yes, that's what I feel. Fear. As a person that survived a near-death accident in 1982, I know in my DNA how fast life can be taken away. The handicap that I was left with from that accident reminds me of that each day. This pandemic has also stirred up memories of having lived through and survived the AIDS crisis of the late 80s and 90s. Memories of watching friends die or just disappear, and memories of other friends who missed the AIDS cocktail by only a few months, and often wondering what might have been if they had just had better timing. We've all gotten through this year, and despite the effort made and the isolation, I fear my timing. I fear that I'll end up getting some variant. I fear that I'll never see my mom again. I fear that I'll regret not having been able to tell a little white lie. I fear my envy. It's not like me. I read another article that offered steps on how to tame this envy. First step is to acknowledge how you feel. Well, wanting to slap the vaccine out of others, clearly acknowledging my feelings has never been a problem. Second step is to reframe the situation and realize that the vaccination only works if everyone is vaccinated. So the fact that our friends are getting vaccinated makes it safer for everyone. I like that. Third step is focusing on your own health. And so I am trying to lose the 20 pounds I put on during this lockdown, while also trying to love my body for exactly how it is, which I suspect at this point is technically obese. There are some more steps, but the last step is the one I'm really focusing on, and that is reflect on what will make you proud in the future. This is what I hope will make me proud. I wore a mask. I practiced social distancing. I isolated. I took bike rides. I learned how to do shows online. I tried to make myself and others feel not so alone. I called my mom every day. I learned how to be a better cook. I made the bed every morning. I loved my husband through it all. I didn't tell any white lies, and I appreciated the little things in life, knowing that someday they'll be the big things. They say the vaccine selfie is a good thing, as it promotes the safety of vaccine and encourages others to get it. So in the future, when I see friends post about getting their vaccine, I will choose to be hopeful that my vaccine is just around the corner, and I'll try my best to send supportive, loving messages like, "Congratulations on getting the vaccine. You've made the world a safer place for everyone, including me. I celebrate and share in your joy. Hashtag, you're still a cunt."
Welcome back, everyone. It's time for us to answer one of our listeners' questions. Miss Coco, this one is for you.
Hey there, this is Chase, and my question is for Miss Coco Peru, and that is, what are your favorite 90s sitcoms?
What's interesting is that I'm at a loss, but the reason why I'm a little bit at a loss is because I created Coco in 1990. And so my 90s were all about being out and promoting my show. So I didn't actually watch a lot of television in the 1990s. And of course, that was back before you could just have anything on demand. So if you missed it, you missed it, you know? But of course, Will and Grace was something I would make an effort to watch because that was such a important show as a gay person. We were not used to that kind of representation. So that felt very huge back then, to see your not yourself, but you know what I mean, to see people like you and like your friends on television. So that was, and talking about the things you talk about. So that was really an important show for me. What were some of the other ones? I did like Larry Sanders' show because it was backstage kind of drama on a talk show. And of course, I loved The Simpsons because I love animation. And that show was just so funny and consistently great. So I loved The Simpsons. Designing Women, I didn't watch it often, but those women had a sort of drag queen sensibility to them. There were a lot of shows that I watched sporadically, but I will say Will and Grace and The Simpsons were both standouts to me. And I loved a British show called Keeping Up Appearances. And I don't even know if that was in the 90s, but for some reason I'm thinking it might have been. Or maybe that's just when I watched it. But
Yeah, I remember that too. I think I watched it as a kid in the 90s.
So great.
Yeah, I think my favorite show, and it's not necessarily defined as a sitcom. I think Ellen McBeal had a huge impact on me.
Right. That was such a big, important show for a lot of people.
Yeah, and there was some queer representation in the show as well. And Will and Grace, I wanted to watch the show when I was a kid, but I was always ashamed when it was on television because I was scared that my parents were gonna find out.
Yeah. That's sad but sweet, and I can relate to it.
Well, now we don't give a shit and accept who we are.
Yes, 100%. It's been an amazing journey these last 30 years to see how much has changed, and I can only imagine. I remember when I was creating Coco that the generation before me was talking about how much change there had been. So I can only imagine what a lot of the older queens that I had met when I was young, what they would say now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Coco, thank you so much for joining me, and this has been a lovely experience with you.
My pleasure, and I'm so glad that you got to have Hamish on, and he's so delightful, and I feel like his heart and his mind and his work are all aligned and in the right place. So it's a pleasure to work with him as well. So I'm so happy that you put a spotlight on him.
Yeah, he's such a sweetheart, and that industry needs more people like him, striving for inclusivity.
Integrity.
Absolutely.
He has integrity.
All right, everyone, Thank you so much for listening. If you want to know more about the show, you can find us on Twitter at QueerAsPop. You can find me at Novakaze, that is Novakaze. You can find Miss Coco at Miss Coco Peru on Twitter, and more information about our current show at casacoco.live, available on demand. Until next time, bye-bye.